Trade negotiators from 8 nations are in the Bay Area negotiating trade agreements as part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's the first such meeting under the Obama administration, but a handful of political and labor leaders rallied outside St. Patrick's Church on Monday to make sure President Barack Obama knows they're watching to see if he follows through on his commitments to reform the unpopular model of NAFTA. Art Pulaski with the California Federation of Labor says NAFTA is costing us jobs.
If you combine it all, Californians could now have 800,000 more jobs if we had balanced trade agreements, fair trade agreements, not this notion of free trade agreements. How many of us know hard-working Californians who are out of work right now without a job? How many of us know people who are struggling to pay their mortgage because they're in a dead-end job, because their career job has been offshore? These are the issues that we want to make sure the trade negotiators from the U.S. understand and represent in these trade negotiations. My worry is, who are they listening to right now? The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is in that hotel. In fact, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is talking about more free trade, is sponsoring the reception tonight. They're buying the food for these trade negotiators from around the world. We know what they're going to be selling, and we're not buying it. We want to be here to say that we're not going to sit back while they negotiate away more California jobs and more U.S. jobs. We're here to say that we need a better deal, we need a fair deal, and we need a new deal when it comes to trade, and that is balanced trade. Trade that protects the environment of the U.S., that protects the environment of the other countries around the Pacific Rim, and trade that protects jobs in the U.S. and doesn't exploit jobs and workers from around the Pacific Rim. We want fair trade, not free trade. Thank you very much.
Richmond Mayor Gail McLaughlin says she especially hopes the jobs of the future we're hearing so much about remain local.
Pleasure to be here today to stand for the kind of trade policy that is needed to keep jobs in cities and to create jobs for cities like the city of Richmond. We experience an 8.5% unemployment rate in Richmond, and so this is of extreme importance to us. Since World War II, Richmond has, been fighting to catch its breath from the loss of jobs that left us in World War II, and then on top of that, the NAFTA and CAFTA policies that have taken jobs from our region, from our city. Cities like Richmond suffer greatly as a result of it. So we are poised right now in the 21st century for the kind of green jobs that are needed. And Richmond has a first-rate green job training program, and it's gotten national attention. We're ready for those green jobs. So we want to make sure that the green industry jobs, the high-tech industry jobs, the infrastructure building jobs of the 21st century stay in the United States, stay in the Bay Area, stay in cities like Richmond, and come to our cities. So this is why this a fair trade policy that protects local jobs, that protects labor regulations, that protects environmental regulations, protects human rights across the globe, so that companies don't go to Asia and other places where they can get away with environmental loss or low environmental regulation. We want across-the-board regulation of environment, across-the-board labor regulations. So truly fair laws are the direction going forward.
And San Francisco Supervisor Ross Mercarimi says the current free trade model being used is basically fragmenting the fabric of our country.
Good morning. I am absolutely honored and delighted to be part of what is a growing blue-green alliance with the consumer movement here in California. This past week, I'm still rather giddy about the fact that it was members and leaders of this particular movement that bonded together to demonstrate a very, very unpredictable defeat on Proposition 16. And we come out of this particular fight when we were outspent 46 million to 100,000, I think feeling our particular commitment in intensifying exactly what we want to promote here today. But not just as an elected official, but just an ordinary American, I want to speak to the concerns that I think help demonstrate why we're congregated here today. I fear that the century of American prowess is over, and I don't mean militarily. We will remain a major power, but maybe not a determinative one, because of the unhinging and unraveling of our great nation is due to the fact that we have compromised the union labor workforce over the last 30 years. The theory in the 1980s and the 1990s about instituting NAFTA, about instituting CAFTA, about instituting GATT, of trying to promote economic development in struggling areas, whether it was from Michigan here in the United States to Monterey, Mexico, or to Manitoba, Canada, has not proven exactly what those theories had tried to borne out. We have seen just the reverse effects. And it is incumbent upon us here, both environmentalists, consumer movements, ordinary citizens, and of course union labor, to bond together to understand that if the enrichment of this country's fabric is requiring us, in order to stitch it back together in that kind of meaningful way, it is to demand a fair trade policy that gives us the fuel that gives this country its greatness back. And that's why it's essential that we speak from an elected platform on a municipal level, on a state level, and more importantly on the federal level, who are the ones who actually created these institutions without consulting the American people as to our consent or not on questions of NAFTA or questions of CAFTA or even on GATT in itself. That we return from a process of unilateral decision-making in making sure that we reverse the harmful course of what those particular treaties and institutions have done. We are suffering from a democracy deficit right now. That deficit because it excludes our ability of our workforce in this nation, union workforce, because we have seen the complete degradation of the manufacturing workforce in the United States only to be exported somewhere else, and now that is filtering into the service sector of the United States.
If I went to a garden in Piedmont with a bunch of guys with AK-47s and at gunpoint stole a bunch of heritage roses, drove down to the port of Oakland, sold them to a middleman who put them on a boat, brought them over to San Francisco, and sold them to Sloat's Nursery, and everybody knew where the roses were coming from because they'd been in the newspaper, we would all go to jail. What happens in the paper and timber trade is gangs with guns illegally go into Indonesia's rainforest, steal logs at gunpoint, put them on a ship, send them to China where they're processed into highly coated papers. Very cheap, of course, because the logs were stolen at gunpoint. And then they're brought into the United States to compete with American paper manufacturers. This is called rule-based trade. It's not called fencing. It's not called an international criminal gang. It's not called theft. In fact, we are told this is good for consumers because the price of those coated papers is lower than it would have been if they had been made with legally grown, legally traded timber. Well, I can offer heritage roses at a much lower price if I can go into Piedmont and steal them from people's gardens at gunpoint. That's not difficult. But that's not America's idea of a free market. It has become America's idea of free trade. We need to bring back the rule of law. We need to allow nations to protect their workers, to protect the environment, and to protect their values at the same time that they engage in the exchange of goods and services. Trade ought not to equal lawlessness. For the past 20 years, it has.
8 nations, including Australia, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, Vietnam, and the U.S., make up the Trans-Pacific Partnership.